Okay, so as promised, we're going to talk a little bit more about types of data and variables. First of all, data and variables can be either qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative data and variables, which, by the way, are also called categorical, are for categories of characteristics that are not numerical. So like color, stuff like that. We'll see some examples in a minute. So qualitative data and variables are not measuring, they're measuring qualities or categories. On the other hand, quantitative data and variables provide a numerical measurement of a characteristic. And just a point to note is they could be meaningfully added or subtracted. So for example, maybe you're measuring someone's height. Okay, you're measuring people's heights. You could meaningfully subtract two people's heights and say, I'm going to subtract these two and tell you the difference in the heights between those two individuals. Okay, now delving a little deeper into quantitative data and variables, they can be either continuous or discrete. So what do those words mean? Continuous data or variables can take on any value in a range or interval of values. And going back to heights, that's another example. So, a person's height can be any number in a range between, I don't know, if we start with babies, 1 foot maybe, up to, what's the tallest person ever? Probably under 9 feet. So a height can be any number in that whole range. On the other hand, discrete data and variables have gaps between possible values, and they're often countable. They often count things. So for example, let's say number of houses in a block, you're measuring that. Well, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. houses. You can't have 1.7 houses in the block or 2.3. Okay, so there's gaps between the possible numbers of houses. There's a gap between the number 1 and 2, and then between 2 and 3. You don't get all the fractional values in between. Okay, some examples. Gender. First of all, let's ask ourselves, is this variable quantitative or qualitative? And then for the quantitative ones, we'll ask ourselves, are they continuous or discrete? So gender, is that qualitative or quantitative? Well, it's not a numerical measurement, so it's qualitative. It's a category. Temperature, that is quantitative. Quantitative, okay. Now temperature, you can have fractional values. So like the temperature could be 80 degrees or 81 degrees, or it could be any number between 80 and 81 degrees, right? The temperature could be 80.6 degrees. You don't have to jump from 80 to 81. So that's quantitative and it's continuous. Number of people in a grocery line. Again, that's quantitative, but that's not continuous. You can't have the number of people in a grocery line can't take on any possible value. It's got to be a counting number. So this one is discrete. Now, the last one's a little tricky. Zip code. Is that qualitative or quantitative? Now, it's a number, but it's not really numerical in the sense that, for example, let's see if I can find where we said this in the notes. Okay, quantitative variables, data and variables provide a numerical measurement. And remember this little addition here, and may be meaningfully added or subtracted. Okay, so that's a little hint there, that not all numbers are numerical measurements. So if looking at houses, if I was measuring, say, the height of the house or the square footage, okay, that would be a quantitative variable, and you could, for example, take the average of house sizes on a block or something. But zip code doesn't really make sense to add two zip codes or take the average of two zip codes, does it? So zip code, even though it's a number, is actually a qualitative variable. I know that's a little confusing. Okay, quick frequently asked question here. I've been talking about, data and variables being qualitative, quantitative, continuous, discrete. It's easy to lose track of the difference between variables and data. So what is the difference between variables and data? Data are the observed values of the variable, and I'll just remind you that the variable is the characteristic being studied. Okay, so the variable refers to the characteristic you're studying. The data are the values that you observe for that variable or characteristic. In the example above, the first variable was gender. So we have some population of people, and a characteristic of each individual in the population would be gender. Then the data, suppose you surveyed them as to their gender, a person could say male, so that would be a data value, or perhaps female, that would be another data value, or perhaps non-binary, that would be another data value, and etc., whatever all the possible answers are. The next variable was temperature. So I didn't specify a population, but maybe the population is days in February this year, and we're measuring the highest temperature of the day. So the variable temperature is a characteristic of each day in that population, and then the data values could be things like 70 degrees or 30.1 degrees or whatever. The actual temperatures are the data. The characteristic temperature is the variable.